come to this distinguished conference. I'm a diplomat. I work for the Egyptian Foreign Service, and I worked in Geneva for 5 years representing my country in international discussions on intellectual property issues in the context of WIPO. And now I'm back to Capital in Cairo, where I work at the Department of International Organizations. So basically, my presentation is based on my experience as a negotiator in Geneva and how I came to interact with these issues. I mean, some of you are goods. Now, for many of us, international organizations and negotiations seem very remote and very distant, actually, but they really have a direct impact on our lives. Global rules in these areas have an impact on many aspects of our society. So if we're thinking about A2K, we have to think about where do we situate it, where does it has its place in this global web of international organizations, agreements, and arrangements. And this knowledge diplomacy has experienced very important changes in the past years. I'll briefly highlight them to come back to the future of A2K strategy. First, we have witnessed an important expansion of global trade and IP rules. I think this has been mentioned already. We had the TRIPS agreement, we had WIPO internet treaties, we have TRIPS plus obligations in many free trade agreements. It seems like a never-ending process, and there's two fundamental features that I would like to draw your attention in this aspect. First is that the convergence of trade and intellectual property created for that totally different, such as textiles, agriculture, and this is a very fundamental change that to have this link, because it brings countries then to weigh the way they engage in these rules with other areas of concern, such as market access for their agricultural products. So that's a fundamental change. But the second change is that for a very long time, trade and IP rules were a very technical area of expertise, very self-contained, and very suddenly, with the TRIPS agreement and with other agreements, they started to have an impact on many other areas, a very profound impact on health, and education, on agriculture. And the truth is that many countries, nationally, particularly developing countries, were not ready to deal with this fundamental shift that occurred with the expansion of global trade and IP rules. Another fundamental change that happened is the relation between global norm setting and national legislation. For a very long time, global norm setting came as a result of national legislation. Countries had similar national concerns in their legislations and came to the international scene to have norms that would reflect their national legislations. And now we have really a process that is reversed. We have global rules that are concluded that induce changes in national legislation. And this is a very important change. Important in several aspects is that international negotiations that lead to these rules do not have the checks and balances and accountability process that you have when legislating nationally. The conditions to create balanced global rules that take into account the interest of all stakeholders and the public interest are not necessarily always met. I mean, if you think of the area of knowledge, I mean, what could be the common ground between a small group of countries who are producers of knowledge goods and the vast majority of countries who are consumers of knowledge goods? I mean, they have often directly opposed interests. So negotiations in this area, they are made, of course, out of persuasion, concessions, compromises, but they're also made of coercion in many areas. If you look at the WIPO internet domain process, for example, and the arbitration system they have, it's a very innovative process that many countries, particularly developing countries, did not understand its full implications when it was made. If you look at bilateral investment treaties, when you do a bilateral investment treaty, you could be also concluding your rules that impact on access to knowledge, given the limitations in bilateral investment treaties they have on expropriations. And for example, how could this affect use of compulsory licenses? And all this is happening in this very complex international scene, when at the national level, countries are very fragmented. There is a very significant fragmentation at the national policy-making level. At each country you have different agencies and governments dealing with each one with the organization. For example, Ministry of Trade and ITU deal with IT and Trade, Ministry of Culture with the board. There was the result of experts from both developed and developing countries squared again, put once again in the international thinking and agenda. And then in 2004, TACD had an important meeting on access to learning, to essential learning tools. And this meeting had panels on access to textbooks, academic journals, distance education data and software, and Jenny can recall this very well. And when we were thinking about the outcome of this meeting, we were wondering, I mean, how can we group all these different issues into one issue, one concept that could make sense of it? And we had a discussion, so we talked about access to information. And my personal feeling, the way I committed at that time, is that talk of intellectual property rights. So we did a counter paradigm that had also this knowledge concept that would stress that access to knowledge is an essential element in fostering creativity and innovation in the knowledge economy. So A2K as a concept, I think is a very strong conceptual strength, as it enjoys legitimacy, it enjoys universality and inclusiveness, and I think these are two very fundamental components. So some people say, oh, but it's not well defined, what does it include, who does it address? You know, the thing that was conceptualized, it was for the movement that could emerge about this concept, that would fill in the gaps and see how, and wisdom. In Islamic civilization also, you had a lot of sayings that encouraged seeking knowledge. So I think that A2K has to be promoted as a positive agenda. It's not can only be construed in opposition to something. It has to be a positive agenda that addresses, on one side, the effects of the expansion of global rules and trade and intellectual property, and on the other promotes new tools and arrangements. And I'm not always sure that when the movement strategizes, we always have it clear what issues are we pursuing. I think A2K has to be very clear about which process it is engaged to. Is it awareness raising, policy making, or norm setting? And maybe the needs of each stage, and landmark binding agreements, cultural diversity. I mean, what's happening in the issue of cultural diversity is amazing. I mean, in 2-4 years, we went from a declaration in UNESCO to a binding international convention. I mean, how was that achieved? And again, I think this is a very, it's very important for the A2K to reflect on this. And if you look at the number of additional protecting international knowledge, we have not reached this yet. We have not reached norm 7 in order to protect additional knowledge and misappropriation. I personally think that A2K is the prevailing paradigm of the future, at least because of its strength and its conceptual strength. And I think we will look again. I mean, when I look back